Okay, so here I have two versions of the bouncing ball rig. So the one on top is the one, this one has separate 3D positions, right, transformations, and the one below has the 3D path, right? So I just want to illustrate the differences in animating a bouncing ball with these two different ones. So I'm gonna keyframe them more or less the same, right? So they're both gonna come down on frame 15. Right, and notice they actually have different symbols on the keyframes, so you can actually see the difference with 3D path and separate 3D position there as well. Okay, so 50 frames come down. Let's do 12 frames, go back up. That'll take us 27. All right, so notice what is happening here by default, right? We got a straight line with the one that's separate, and with the 3D path, it's trying to average a curve in between each keyframe. So that's something else you have to be aware of, right, when you're animating with 3D path. Right, next keyframe, let's go to 39. All right, let's go 8 frames after this, so 47. All right, so I'm just trying to make the bounces less frames as it goes down. And another 8 frames would take us to 55. Let's say 6 frames would take it back up to 61. Okay, so obviously we're lacking principles with both of them. This one is just going linear. This one is kind of trying to average a curve in between. Okay, so let's focus on 3D path for now, right? So we know that with 3D path we can, um, I can go here and I can, take this one and move it up and sort of keyframe it out like that, right? Or I can just leave the keyframes and just hover over the curve and press P and, you know, shape out the curve like that with curve points. Now this is not changing the spacing, right? The spacing of the each tick here is a frame, right? So the spacing of these is remaining more or less constant between along the curve. All right. So that's something that we need to understand, right, with this 3D path. Because a bouncing ball, we want a very specific kind of spacing. And what we'll see is that it's not that easy to get that spacing with the 3D path. Alright, so let me just zoom in here. And I can go in and try to refine these more. But for now I think that that curve is okay. Um, Maybe just put a couple more there. Right, okay. So if I play it now, right, the arc might be fine, but you see it's just moving very floatily, right? There's no weight here, and that's because of the spacing. So let me go down here. So we see with the position, right? X, Y, and Z is together. If I double click on this and open my Bezier editor, or in this case, the 3D Path editor, we see I do have, I can visualize these curves, right? Right now I'm looking at the X. This is what the X is looking like. This is the Y, right? This is the up and down, which kind of mirrors what we're seeing here. And yeah, there's nothing in the Z, right? Z would be back and forth, but we're just doing left to right and up and down. Okay, um, so let's see what kind of adjusting we can do here. Now, I'm not getting any kind of handles to sort of change the shape of these curves here. What I can do, right, is move this position. Oh, it seems I can I? Yeah, I can move it actually left to right and up and down a bit. All it feels a bit constricted. I'm very limited, it seems, or it's not very intuitive in terms of what it's letting me do here, right? So I don't find it particularly helpful to try to even see. I can't raise it vertically. I don't know if I hold shift maybe. No. Right. So this is and let's say if I wanted to, just delete frames on the X alone, right? So generally with a bouncing ball, right, your spacing, the spacing is undulating, right? But with a bouncing ball, you'd want it to start off quicker and then sort of gradually taper off. But it is sort of undulating, going steeping out, flattening, steeping out, flattening, steeping out. All right, so let's say, I mean, if we just wanted to smooth out this curve, but if I delete all those frames, it's deleting on the Y and the Z as well. So that's no good, right? So editing here separately is not really much of a help to us. Right? It's not very intuitive. I don't find it particularly helpful. What we do have here is velocity, right? And basically, this velocity will control the speed in between keyframe, from keyframe to keyframe, right? So let's say from here to here, if I want to slow out, right, I can actually have tangents for this one because just one attribute by itself. I can have it slow out here, and then as this curve is steeper, right, it's gonna come in faster. And you can see the spacing here, right? If you look at these ticks here, right, as I make that curve steeper, the space between these is getting much more towards this keyframe here. And as this gets flatter, right, they're getting close together here. Now you might think, all right, well, fine, that's probably the best way to do this bouncing ball, right? Slow out, fast out, slow in, slow out, fast in, fast out, right? Well, let's try that and see how it goes, right? So again, we want it faster here. We want it to slow down as it reaches the top of the arc. And we do that all the way through, right? Keeping it flat wherever it's at the top of the arc. Just gonna close this one. All right, so let's see what we have going on now. Now, it's certainly speeding up as it hits the ground and it's bouncing as it hits the ground, but the forward momentum feels strange, right? There's this strange pause at the center of the arc. And that is because this is slowing down in all, not only the Y is slowing down, but it's also slowing down in the X, right? So to illustrate, it's slowing down this way right here. But we don't want that, right? We want it to continuously move this way with a very gradual slow down, right? Going all the way to the end. Whereas the y, right, this is our x, the y, when it goes up, if it's going up, right, as it's closer to the ground, it's going to be more spaced out closer to the ground, and then as it gets to the top of the arc, it's going to slow down this way. So the spacing is very different for the x and the y, and it's very difficult to replicate that with this 3D path. So let's try it with this one here, the separate one. So with this one here, I can double click and get the Bezier editor for the Translate X. Alright, and if I want, I can delete all these here, and I can just put a gentle slow down here and just a subtle speed up here, right? And if I double click the Y, come on guy, don't know why that took so long. Right, so we see the Y is still linear. We have these handles here, and we still have our keyframes here, right? And I can change the spacing here so that it is, right, slow on top, fasten out, right, and slowing down at the top of these arcs here. Kind of want to keep these flat, don't want any overshoots here. There we go. And if we play this, let's see how this is looking now. Alright, so obviously it's not absolutely following the this path anymore, right? But we see that it's not slowing down, right, in the middle of the peak, right? It's a gradual slowdown in the X, and our spacing is different in the Y, right? So this is more what we want here, and we got that a lot more intuitively than with the 3D path. So I'm not saying 3D path is completely useless. It may be good for some things, like if you have an object going along a path, a fly buzzing around, and you could just create a quick arcing path, and you just want it slowing in and slowing out, slowing in and slowing out of each keyframe, then that's easy to do. And in that case, you actually want it to stay along the curve, and you want to keep the spacing on the X and the Y the same, right? Because it's following the same path. But if you want to ever, adjust your spacing for different paths, not paths, but axes, the X versus the Y, right? The left to right versus the up and down, then separate is your best bet, right? And you could, if you want to do a fly buzzing around with separate, you could also do that as well, right? You just have to, keep in mind, you just have a couple more curves to tweak, but once you know that Y is up and down and X is left to right, then you should be okay. All right. So let's see where we are for time. Okay, so what I'll do is I will try to quickly add some squash and stretch to this animation. Alright, and you can see just how adjusting one curve sort of adjust the position of our bounces there. It's pretty cool. Right, so squash and stretch is going to be our scales. Alright, so I'm going to go back into the transform, and right whenever it's down, I will make this a squash. move it a bit more. I think in this case I want to add a line here first so I know where my ground plane is. Actually, let me just make it a new drawing layer. Right. And just move it down there. Right. I will lock that. Alright, so I want to squash this. So to maintain the volume, if I'm squashing it in the this way, I need to expand it out that way, right? Let me make sure that this is exposed for the entire animation. And if it's squashing, and then it has to stretch, right? So the frame before, I will just stretch it out a little bit, and maybe just give it a little bit of tilt there. Alright, this one. And a little bit of tilt there. Boing. Alright, so I'm going through all the way to here. So it's going to be a little less squash, right, as it's a shorter bounce here. And obviously if there's less squash, is going to be less stretch. Right after, I'll put another stretch frame right after there. I notice I'm doing the stretch first and then the tilt, right? Because if I rotate it first, then I try to stretch, it might not necessarily stretch in the right direction, right? So we should be alright there. Okay, so we have our squash and stretch. It's feeling a bit watery, right? Those bounces, and that's because we need to tighten up the spacing on the squash and stretch, right? So that is these scale X, scale Y. I'm double clicking. Must be my pen tablet doesn't like the double click here. Right, so that stretch needs to slow out more. So from here to here, right, this is the maximum stretch here, and this is normal. So we want to slow out there. So just flatten that. In fact, alright, so I can zoom in and zoom out. Alright, same 1 and 2. I can make it narrower with 3, or make it wider with 4. Alright, so let's see if I can even steepen this up a little bit more so it doesn't really start to stretch that much until, all right, it gets lower. And then from here, it's gonna quickly get back up into this shape here. Same thing here, it's gonna slow out. Alright, so I'm just doing that down the line, slowing in and out of the high positions. And I need to do it for, this is scale X, I need to do it for scale Y as well. Alright, slowing out here. And there. Okay, so let's see how that looks. Alright, a little better. And now the real magic is when I add the rotation, right? Right now we just have the tilt, right? But we want to add the forward rotation as this ball is not only bouncing but rolling forward as it bounces. So that's going to be pretty easy because in this case I'm animating the drawing, right, which is bouncing ball. Alright, so I can just select it here or just click on it here, right? Once you see the purple, you know, you have the drawing selected. Right, so I'm going to just press F6 here to set a keyframe. I have auto key on, so when I go to the end, I can just decide how many times I want this thing to rotate. One, two, maybe two and a half, like that. And so it says rotate angle Z. Alright, we can see it's just linear now. Because this ball isn't coming to a complete stop, you know, it is going to be more or less linear, right? Just like with the translate X curve, but I'll still have it maybe start just a little bit faster and maybe just slow down just a little bit towards the end there. Let's see how that looks. Right. So this is one way you can, you know, animate a bouncing ball with rotation and squash and stretch together. It only really works from the side on view. That's the caveat. But hopefully this is a good gives you a good idea of how to work with the curve editor, right? The Bezier curves to maximize um, the use of spacing, right, between your keyframes, and hopefully gives you a good comparison of, you know, using pegs with separate X, Y, and Z and the 3D path, right, and the pros and the cons of both of those.